Hello, and welcome back to Loud and Pretty Average Gaming. This is Reese speaking, also known as Aussie Legend 44 in some of our other videos. This is part 9.2 of our Grimoire series from Destiny. In this video, we will continue reading from the primary weapons Grimoire, but focus on the hand cannon The Last Word and its Ghost Fragments. The second of the exotic hand cannons is The Last Word. Yours, not mine. A quote from the renegade hunter Shin Malfa to Dredgen Yor during the showdown at Dwindler's Ridge. The Last Word is a romantic weapon, a throwback to simpler times when steady aim and large rounds were enough to dispense justice in the wilds of a lawless frontier. Of course, some might say that that time has come again. This is from the Ghost Fragments on The Last Word. I'm writing this from memory, some mine, but not all. The facts won't sync with reality, but they'll be close, and there's no one to say otherwise. So for all intents and purposes, this will be the history of a settlement we called Palamon, and the horrors that followed an all too brief peace. I remember home, and stories of a paradise we'll all get to see someday, of a city shining even in the night. Palamon didn't shine, but it was a sanctuary, of a sort. We'd settled in the heart of a range that stretched the horizon, wooded mountains that shot with purpose towards the sky. Winters were harsh, but the trees and peaks hid us from the world. We talked about moving on, sometimes, striking out for the city, but it was just a longing. Drifters came and went, on occasion they would stay, but rarely. We had no real government, but there was rule of law, basic tenets agreed upon by all, and eventually overseen by Magistrate Loken. And there you have it, no government until there was. I was young, so I barely understood. I remember Loken as a hard-working man who just became broken. Mostly I think he was sad and frightened. As his fingers tightened in Palamon, people left. Those who stayed saw our days became grey. Loken's protection, from the fallen, from ourselves, became dictatorial. Looking back, I think maybe Loken had just lost too much of himself, his family, but everyone lost something. And some of us had nothing to begin with. My only memory of my parents is a haze, like a daydream, and a small light, like the spark of their souls. It's not anything I dwell on. They left me early, taken by dregs. Palamon raised me from there. The family I called my own, cared for me as if I was their natural born son. And life was good. Being the only life I knew, my judgment is skewed. And it wasn't easy, pocked by loss as it was, but I would call it good. Until, of course, it wasn't. Until two men entered my world. One a light, the other the darkest shadow I would ever know. The man I would come to know as Yaren Ward, my third father and quite possibly my closest friend, came to Palamon from the south. I was just a boy, but I'll never forget his silhouette on the empty trail as he made his slow walk into town. I'd never seen anything like him. Maybe none of us had. He'd said he was only passing through, and I believed him. Still do. But life can get in the way of intent, and often does. I can picture that day with near perfect clarity. Of all the details though, every nuance, every moment, the memory that sticks in my mind is the iron on Yaren's hip. A cannon that looked both pristine and lived in. Like a relic of every battle he had ever fought, hung low on his waist, a trophy and a warning. This man was dangerous, but there was a light about him, a pureness of his weight, that seemed to hint that his ire was something earned, not carelessly given. I'd been the first to see him as he approached, but soon most of Palamon had turned out to greet him. My father held me back as everyone stood in silence. Yaren didn't make a sound behind his sleek racer's helmet. He looked just like the heroes in the stories, and to this day I'm not sure one way or the other if the silence between the townspeople and the adventurer was born of fear or respect. I like to think the latter, but any truth I place on the moment would be of my own making. As we waited for Magistrate Loken to arrive and make an official greeting, my patience got the best of me. I shook free of my father's heavy hand and made a short sprint across the court, stopping a few paces from where this new curiosity stood, a man unlike any other. I stared up at him, and he lowered his attention to me, his eyes hidden behind the thick, tinted visor of his headgear. My sight quickly fell on his sidearm. I was transfixed by it. I imagined all the places that weapon had been, all of the wonders it had seen, the horrors it had endured, My imagination darted from one heroic act to the next. I barely registered when he began to kneel, holding out his iron as if an offering. But my eyes locked onto the piece, mesmerized. I recall turning back to my father and seeing the looks on the faces of everyone I knew. There was worry there. My father slowly shaking his head as if pleading with me to ignore the gift. I turned back to the man I would come to know as Yaren Ward, the finest hunter the system may ever know, and one of the greatest guardians to ever defend the Traveler's light. And I took the weapon in my hand, carefully, gently, not to use, but to observe, to imagine, to feel the weight and know its truth. That was the first time I held the last word, but unfortunately not the last. It was the 4th night of the 7th moon, 9 rises since any sign. Trail wasn't cold, but lukewarm would have been an exaggeration. Yaren had us holed by a ravine. The heavy wood along the cliff's edge caught the wind, holding back the cold, and the rush of water muffled our conversation. We'd seen dual skiffs hanging low as they cut through the valley. Wasn't fallen territory, but any more that's a dangerous assumption. There were 6 of us then. 3 less than 2 moons prior, but still, 1 more than when we had first turned our backs to Palamon's ash. We took a rotation for watch during the night. Movement was kept to a minimum, and communication was down to hand signals and simple gestures. We could hold our own in a fight, but only the dead went looking for one. A hard truth that cut in direct opposition to our reason for being so far from anything resembling civilization, much less our safety. The skiffs had spooked Kressler and Nada, and in truth me as well. But looking back, I think we were just grasping for any good reason to turn back. Not because we would turn back, but because it seemed to be our only real hope, and I think we all knew it. Forward where we were headed into the unknown, and following the footsteps we were, it all just started to feel like a never-ending dead end after a while. Yaren never wavered though. Not once. At least not to any noticeable degree. It was his drive, his conviction, that kept us going. And, it's hard to think on, but if I'm honest, it was his death that rekindled my own fire. A fire that was all but exhausted in the cold night. He seemed confident we were close. But more than confident, sure. He seemed sure. No one else felt it. Our own confidence and any enthusiasm we'd had was set into wither as soon as Brevin, Tren, and Mel were gunned down. The ghost, Yaren's ghost, never said a word to any of us. Just hung there. Always alert, always judging. Not us per se, but the moment. Any moment. I never got the sense it thought of us as lesser. More that it was guarded, wary. We knew it could speak. We'd ever heard them a few times. Just brief words, and no one ever pressed the subject. From time to time I caught its gaze lingering on me, but always assumed the attention was a result of the bond Yaren and I had. He was a father to me. At the time, I didn't know why he'd singled me out as someone to care for, someone to protect. After all the loss, I welcomed it, but looking back, taking the arm's length at which he kept the others, I guess I should have known, or at least suspected, there was more to it. We all woke that night, closer to the morning than the previous day. A crack of gunfire split through the wood, then more. Far off, but near enough to pump the blood. A familiar ring. The last word, Yaren's sidearm, his best friend. Then another. A single shot. An unmistakable echo calling through the night, hushed, cutting. One shot, dark and infernal, followed by silence. We crouched low and quiet, listening, hoping. Yaren was gone, off on his own. Maybe we were closer than we allowed ourselves to believe. Too close. He'd gone to face death alone. I couldn't admit it, not at the time, but he thought he was protecting us. After such a long road, years on its heels, a trail littered with suffering and fire, maybe he just couldn't take the thought of any more dead kids, as he called us. The echoes faded, and we all held still. No way to track the direction, no sense in rushing blind. What was done was done. The cadence of shots fired told the story none of us wanted to hear. The last word it hadn't been. And somewhere in the world, close enough for us to bear absent witness, but far enough to be a dream, Yaren Ward lay dead or dying, and there was nothing to be done. Hours passed, an eternity. We held our spot, but as the sun rose, the others began to fade back into the world. Without Yaren, there was nothing holding us together. No driving force. Vengeance had grown stale as a motivator. Fear, and a longing to see more suns rise, drove a wedge between duty and desire. By midday I was alone. I couldn't leave. Wouldn't. Either I would find Yaren and set him at ease, or the other would find me, and that would be a fitting end. Death marching on. But then, a motion. Quick and darting. My muscles tensed, and my hands shot to the grip of my lead slinger. Then, a confirmation of the horrible truth I had already accepted, as Yaren's ghost came to a halt a few paces from me. I exhaled and slumped forward, still standing, but broken. The tiny light looked me over with a curious tilt to its axis, then shot a beam of light over my body, scanning me as it had done the very first time we met. I looked up, staring into its singular glowing eye, and it spoke. Unfortunately, as of the Dark Below DLC, that is everything on the last word. So thank you for joining me through this tale thus far. Hopefully, when another DLC comes out, we'll hear more about this excellent hand cannon. In the next video, we'll be reading about another hand cannon, Thorn. Until then, I'll see you next time.